This is January 7th, 1987, at the Fountain Lake Farm site. It's an interview with Irv Schmitz, a son of Archie Schmitz. Was that your grandfather, Irwin? Archie was?
He was my dad. Herman Schmitz was my...
Herman Schmitz was Irwin's grandfather, who originally owned the property. And then his father, Archie, had it after that and built a small house that Irwin says is on the cellar depression, was built on the cellar depression of the original Muir Fountain Lake framed farmhouse. I'm just going to test the tape here for a second. When Irwin and I first reached the Fountain Lake Farm this morning, we took a drive down to the east, down Gillette Drive, and Irwin pointed out on what is now the McGrath property, on top of a ridge. It used to be an old log cabin that sat up there, and I guess there's still a couple of lilac bushes that still bloom up there. And I'll be looking for that come spring when the lilac should be blooming. We also went down to his father's original homestead, down beyond the old Seth Campbell place to the east, and that farm is now abandoned. It's directly across the road from Arno Kuhn's place. And then Irwin also pointed out the original David Taylor homestead, which is across the road and to the east from his Archie Smith's original homestead. And up on top of that ridge you can see some tops of some white pines, and there's an orchard near there, and there's some old building sites up in there from the Taylor homestead. Also, the Taylor corn crib was moved over to the Schmitz farm and still sits on the among the rest of the abandoned buildings there on the Schmitz old Schmitz property. We also drove over, and Irwin pointed out where the old Cuff farm and old Jimmy McGrath place used to be, to the west from County F, going towards the Fox River, which is now federal crane refuge land. And then he also pointed out that the Audley Cuff farmhouse was moved down County F to the south, and is now owned by the Radisacks, and has been extensively remodeled.
Just a minute. That house is owned by O'Connell now.
Okay.
Retazic don't own that. O'Connell owns that house that was moved down in there.
Okay, that would be Dennis O'Connell there.
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing, we got out of the truck and walked up on the to the east from County F on a sandy slope there, and he pointed out where the woodshed, the schoolhouse number 5, and its accompanying male and female privies sat. And contrary to popular belief, they're not in back of the snow-fenced lane, but they're beyond that towards the Dennis O'Connell house, up on a little knoll not too far off of the county highway there. There's cornerstones still in place where the woodshed sat for the schoolhouse, and the schoolhouse's site is sitting amongst some cedars now. Then we went through the Muir Park, and Irwin pointed out along one of the sandy bluffs that slopes just above the boat landing area of the Muir, or I should say Fountain Lake is the correct name, where there used to be an old dugout log hut sort of thing back when he used to walk to schoolhouse number 5 as a child. He recalls that sitting in the sandy knoll there as a dugout log shanty sort of thing. Then we got back over to the Muir, or I should say we also inspected the old winged house site just beyond the granite marker when we were leaving the park. There's still lilacs there that are living. And Irwin recalls the house sitting there as well, and he identified it by the picture I brought along today as being the same house that Ben Hull identified also for me, sitting there earlier. I should say that I just learned today that Ben Hull passed away just sometime before Christmas. I was very sorry to hear that. At any rate, that house has again been identified as being the house that sat by the marker there. Then we drove off back to the Fountain Lake Farm site and came down the lane and got out, and we've been inspecting the site, and Irwin has been making some very good, vivid, clear recollections of what the site was like when he was younger, and I'm just going to put it over now on Irwin and just ask him a few questions about how the site around the house has changed since his earliest memories.
Yeah. all growed up the trees around here. Back years ago, there wasn't any trees around here at all to mount anything, only the big ones that were around the home. And we pastured all this land here, and to the north of the buildings, that's all pine trees now. That was all open fields. There was no trees there, and on the sand ridge across the meadow or the fountain or springs, I should say, there was no trees there, just a bunch of blow sand and so on. There's been a lot of changes made through the years. I hardly knew the place.
Irwin, you mentioned earlier too that the trees at the foot of the hill here below the house that are, I'm sure with the leaves on, you wouldn't be able to really see much of the meadow and certainly not the lake. And you mentioned in earlier times there were no trees there, and you could look right out onto the meadow and even look beyond and see the lake. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, you could look right out from by the house up here, and look right out across the springs and right out onto the lake out there. There was no, just a little brush down there, no big trees like there is now.
And
it was all wide open.
You also mentioned then to the east of the house, going over towards the Val McGrath line, that was all open field as well. In fact, you tilled that or worked that land too, and now it's pretty much gone up to a dense stand of mostly black locust.
That's all growed up to black locust. There was just a patch along the fence line back years ago. Otherwise, that was all wide open there too. There was nothing around here, only the big trees.
And you recall, of course, when your parents lived here, there were no outside sheds on the property at all. Those have all been added by the people from Racine. The only outside building outside of the house was the privy site.
That's right. Just an outside privy. That's all there was. They didn't put up any other buildings here at all.
And they had no electricity, and they only had a hand pump for a well. Is that right?
That's right. Just a hand pump for a well, and no electricity. They had bottle gas for their cook stove.
And the other thing, Irwin, I should mention, brought along with him today is some great old photographs of the house here after it was built, and it looks quite a bit different, although you can identify window and door arrangements and so on and so forth. Definitely is the house. The site is very much the same. It also helps to clarify, judging by John Muir's sketches of the Fountain Lake Farmhouse. You can see a lot more similarity just in what's changed over the last 40 years by those photos. The other thing I should ask Irwin, we should document, to the best of his recollection, there were no Muir buildings or artifacts, fencing, old boards, anything like that here, as long as he can remember or ever heard about from his father or grandfather.
Nope, there was nothing here, only a few stones around where the old cellar hole was. Otherwise, there was nothing. No boards, no nothing. Nothing.
Irwin also remembers the old cellar depression, and I brought along with me today some old photographs dated from 1920 that I obtained copies of through the State Historical Society. One shows a flat, large stone, that glacial stone that's labeled the doorstep stone to John Muir's house. Another one shows a man by the name of D.E. Owens, which is David Owens, digging around with a stick in looks like an old cellar depression, and we've pretty much determined by that picture that is the site of the present house. And I'm just going to ask everyone to comment on that and see if he agrees with that stuff and can recall the doorstep stone and stuff.
Yeah, I recall that big flat stone being there, and looking at the picture and lining things up, it all comes out where Dave Owens is standing there pointing with that stick. That's the old cellar hole. So,
and how deep was the cellar hole, Irwin, when you remember it?
I would say in the middle it'd probably be 4 or 5 feet down.
Mm-hmm.
But
okay.
Where it shows Dave Owens pointing into it, it's all full of weeds,
Right.
So you wouldn't know how deep it was
right.
unless you got down into it.
Right. Now, what did basically your father then, and you guys just dug the old cellar depression out, and then hand poured the concrete basement then that's here now?
Yeah, they went to work and dug the cellar hole in the same place because they figured they wouldn't have to dig out so much dirt, and then they had a man come in, and it was all mixed in a cement mixer. They shoveled it in and mixed it in wheelbarrow full at a time, and poured all the walls and the floor in it.
Mm-hmm. And then the wood used for the house you'd mentioned earlier was some old rough sawn oak and for timbers and
Well, that we logged off at the home place. We got the logs and had them sawed. Then we hauled them back here. It seems to me they were sawed with an old steam engine and a saw rig over on the Cuff farm.
And also the gravel then you used for mixing the concrete came from the old home Schmitz place too.
That's right. That come from the old the gravel pit on the home farm.
Okay. Now another thing we've done today is walk over on the lane where, by popular belief, people think the Muir house stood. In between the two lilacs, there is a shallow depression there, and beyond that, there's a gully that's full of glacial fieldstones. And Irwin can recall some things too about that, both depressions, the one between the lilacs and also then the one now that's rock strewn. Do you want to comment on those, Irwin?
Yes, that first one, that depression that sodded over. Now that was just a kind of a washout. It washed part of the road out where you come in here, and the other one was just a washout. We threw the stones we picked off the fields into that. But this other one, we piled brush into it and got it to sod over. And of course, by filling it in and building it up, the water didn't run down through there. It went somewhere else, so then it sodded over pretty easy then.
Did the depression that's between the lilacs, Irwin, did that ever look to you like a cellar depression?
No.
Never did.
It never did.
And what about the depression then where you threw the rocks, where you can still see the rocks? Did that ever look like a building depression?
That was just a washout, just a raw washout until we started piling stones into it and kind of blocking it off.
But where you dug out the depression then where the house is sitting today, where your parents' house was built, that was pretty well known amongst all the old people around that you always heard when you were a child and everything. That was the cellar depression of the Muir house.
That's right, and that's where that big flat rock laid that you showed me the picture of.
Yes, that's right. Okay.
So I'm pretty sure that was the cellar way, or cellar hole for the old Muir homestead.
And that's what your parents realized too when they built the house, is that right?
Yes, that's why they built the home here. It was just the idea of building on the old Muir basement or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Okay. Today we also talked about, based on the sketch John Muir made again of the farmyard and also the old photos that Irwin has agreed to make copies of for me, and then also standing here on the site today. We've been noting the arrangement of the large yard trees, the shade trees here, and it seems that all three periods in history, when they were small in the Muir sketch, when they were almost as large as today. In fact, some are dead and gone. But we've determined that the tree planting arrangement is also the same in all three instances. Wouldn't you agree with that, Irwin?
I would agree with that. There's three trees in a line on the south side where the old house was supposed to have stood, and it all looks the same to me. Only they're real small at that time. But they're just single trees there is all in each spot. And over a period of 100 years or so, they would get as big as what they are now.
And one of the especially large trees, there's a stump now just to the it would be just to the northeast, I believe, of the corner of the house here, right next to a little shed. That one in the photos Irwin has is still living and leafed out, and it's probably the biggest of the bunch, I would say, wouldn't you, Irwin?
I would say it was the largest one. It was a huge tree, even when the folks built the house here. It was really huge.
I'm now going to ask Irwin some more detailed descriptive questions, or just want him to comment in a descriptive way on the old schoolhouse number 5 site, and he attended that school. He walked to school from the home Schmitz place on Gillette Drive with school buddies while he was a child, and I'll just ask him to comment on that site.
There was the schoolhouse, and then there was a woodshed where the wood was put in, and then one school teacher that taught there, she kept her horse in there when she come with a horse and buggy from across the river. And then there was the privies, one side for the girls and one on the other knoll for the boys. And we had a small playground in the front, not much. We used to slide downhill in the back in the wintertime on skis or old barrel staves.
That must have been fun.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun there in the back, sliding downhill and playing games.
Can you describe the school, Irwin? Was that log or was that frame? Or?
No, that was a frame building. It had windows on both sides and the blackboards in the back. It had a big old wood heater in it, and the teacher stoke it up in the morning, and then we'd sit around that till it got warm enough so we could go to our desks and sit down.
Do you remember what color the school was?
I think it was white, if I remember correctly. Yeah, the woodshed was red.
The woodshed was red.
Yeah, the woodshed was red, and the outhouses, they weren't even painted.
Okay, but there was one for the girls, one for the boys.
Yeah.
They're kind of on opposite knolls there,
Yeah.
aren't they?
One on each side.
Okay, well that's a good description of that. Now, I was going to ask you too, I imagine that area around the schoolhouse wasn't growing up either. That was probably open, huh?
Well, there was a lot of trees around there at that time. We used to play hide and seek and so on, and there were a lot of trees and underbrush, even in them days.
Okay. Now we're going to move over, and I want you to comment a little bit on the old log house that used to sit on your old home place before the frame house was built.
Well, it set a little northeast of the main house there. The old stones was there, and a kind of a depression in the ground and so on. Most of the timbers was all gone. There wasn't much of anything, and then we cleaned it up in later years so that there was nothing left after that. Then they graded a road up through there when they changed the highway. Then it all disappeared. Then.
You don't happen to know who originally settled there and built that log house, do you?
No, I don't. I don't have any idea who built that house there. That's way too far back. My dad didn't even know.
But you said earlier when we were driving that the corn crib that's now still on that site actually did come from the Taylor farm.
Oh yes, we cut that into the bottom part into 4 pieces and the roof into 4 pieces, and then we skidded it down on skids with a team of horses. Then we put it all back together again so that nobody knew it was cut apart.
So it looks pretty much identical to how it looked then when it was on the Taylor farm.
Yeah, it looks just the same now as it did when it set up way up on the Taylor house up there, Taylor farm.
And who owns the old home place now, Irwin?
Just a minute, shut it off.
Okay.
And by the name of Guyland Van Aston.
Okay.
Owns it now.
And that's basically, as we were looking at it, it looks like it's in the southeast quarter of Section 13 there. It shows 160 acres or a quarter section.
It's 160 and 50. It's 210 acres altogether.
Okay. And what size was it when you farmed it years ago?
Well, altogether, the land that we owned, we had 450 acres that we farmed with horses. Good
size, yeah. Now the Taylor farm, if we're looking at we now before us have a current plat book. Whose name is that under then?
It's Arnold Cohen.
Okay.
Corn, I don't know just how you would pronounce it. Kuhn.
Now, that would be just above the home place in the northeast quarter of Section 13. Did the Taylors have any other land besides that 160?
Nope.
Just that 160
just that
there.
160 acres.
Okay, now we're going to talk more about the Taylor place and give me your best recollections of what that was like. You mentioned there was a real nice orchard there once.
Yeah, there was a 5-acre orchard, and they had all different kinds of apples in it, different ones in each row. They had the early apples and the winter apples, and then they had pie apples. It covered about 5 acres, something like that.
And that orchard you mentioned was just north of the buildings?
Just north of the buildings, yes. The buildings sat just over the fence from it while there was a driveway in between. And then there was a house and a small barn. About all it was for was to put a team of horses in and 2 or 3 cows. And then there was a kind of a open shed that they had to put their buggies or wagons or some of their machinery in. There wasn't too many buildings up there.
Okay.
The biggest marker up there was a couple of great big lone pines that was up there, and they were huge.
Okay, we could still see those today. Let's talk more about the buildings now. Were any of the buildings made of logs?
No, they were just, the house was a frame house, and the barn was built out of rough sawed lumber. Is all. It was just high enough so you could get in it. There was no haymow in it or nothing.
Was it a small house, do you think?
Well, I would say it was a medium-sized house. It wasn't real small.
Do you remember what color that was?
It wasn't painted. It was black.
Okay. All right. Another one that wasn't painted. Okay.
It had their boards on it, and they were just turned black from the weather.
Okay. So if one enters the old Taylor driveway today off of Gillette Drive, you drive there to the north off Gillette Drive, and you follow what's now a pine plantation, I believe, back in there, and one can see a big white pine there kind of going in, and that would be the entrance.
Yeah, that would be the entrance. You had to go clear around and come up the hill from the back way. The people that lived there, the Taylors and Hires, they had to come down the hill to the road across from the house and the home place, and that's where they got their water. There was a pump down there, and they pumped the water for their cattle and their horses down there. You couldn't drive up the hill because it was too steep.
Okay.
You had to go around like a mountain and come in from the back way.
Now we're back to the Fountain Lake Farm site, talking more about how Irwin's grandfather, Herman, first acquired the original Muir Home 80, and sort of the condition it was in when he got it, how he got it, and that kind of thing.
Well, he got it. He loaned money on it, more or less a mortgage, and the man that owned it couldn't pay it off, so then my grandfather took it, and then we used it for a pasture after that, the whole 80 acres.
You remember what the man's name was, Irwin, that had it before your grandfather?
Howard McGuinn.
Okay.
We called him Old Howard McGuinn. He owned it.
Okay. And was there any buildings, anything at all, any fences, old fence or anything on that 80 that you ever heard about?
Nope, there was no fences on it at all when we got it. There were no trees to mount anything and no fences at all.
Was it good farmland or was it real sandy and pretty well burned out?
Well, the soil wasn't too bad, but it was so stony that it was awful hard to work.
Mm-hmm. What mostly did you grow then? Corn, was it?
Corn and hay.
Okay.
We'd put grain in, of course, and then seed it to hay, and we didn't farm it too much until later years. Mostly we just used it for pasture for our young stock.
Mm-hmm. So now, as I understand it, then basically you plowed the entire 80 acres except right up here where the old Muir buildings used to sit.
That's right, and where that sand hill is over there, and then where the springs are. Otherwise, we plowed the rest of it and worked it, but like I said, it was so hard to work, we mostly left it for pasture.
Mm-hmm. Okay, because there's been so much local confusion as well as scholarly and national confusion as to the exact siting of the Muir buildings at Fountain Lake Farm, I'm just going to put it bluntly to Irwin and just have him comment on this. Irwin, is there any doubt in your mind at all as to whether or not the original Muir farmhouse sat on the old cellar depression that your father dug out that the present house sits on today?
No, as far as I'm concerned, there's no doubt in my mind that this was the old site of the Muir home when they lived in this area here.
And those other depressions that you and I looked at together today that have the lilacs straddling them, and then also the rocks and the gully and so on, you don't have any feeling then that those are probably or possibly Muir house sites?
No, I don't. From the time I can recollect, there were nothing but just washouts from rainwater.
Okay, well, I'm satisfied with that. Thank you, Irwin.
Okay.
Also, in looking at the house site right now in the yard here at Fountain Lake, there's no good reason why there would be a grouping such as they're arranged of large maples unless there was a house there, a main house at one time. If a person studies the size of those maples, they've been retained deliberately as yard shade trees. I believe this helps substantiate what Irv Schmitz said today. It's just one more point in favor of saying the house was in fact where the present one is now. So besides the lilacs, that means that the big maples in the yard were also Muir planted. These are just notes to myself, by the way, as I walk around the site. Maybe it's the landscape architect in me, but it seems that the yard trees are very obvious that common sense would dictate that that's where a house was. I should have noticed that a long time ago. As I go down the road, I know now that Lenny Marsh Wolf was right when she said that the Scotch people seem to like to build their houses far back off the road on top of a hill with a wide view. It's very typical in this area. I just went by the little UP church where John Muir's father preached, and I see Stinky's got Merry Christmas, Best Wishes, and Great Orgasms hanging from the trailer. Stinky's tidings are hanging from old pie tins, aluminum pie tins in Mobile fashion, from a tree limb just outside the trailer. I see Gail just arrived at Stinky's. She must have got off work early. Thought she had an exam tonight. I must have my dates mixed up. Or she does. Another reminder as I drive up towards the driveway here at Hickory Hill Farm now, the second Muir farm, that both Muir farms are on a hill with a wide view, far back off the road. Typical Dan Muir style. Okay, it's still January 7th, 1987, and now I'm sitting around the kitchen table with Harry Kearns at Hickory Hill Farm, and Harry's got a few comments to make on the Fountain Lake site as to where the house sat. And Harry, you're looking real good since the last time I saw you. You're going to be, what, 98 in February, is that right? Well,
I think it will.
Okay, well, you're looking really good. Harry, before the tape went on, we were commenting on now, to your recollection, you said you saw where the Fountain Lake farmhouse used to sit, and that was in some kind of a depression, and you think that the Archie Schmitz house that was built there in the mid-40s, as I understand, was built on the same spot as the Muir house was. Is that correct?
I think that's right.
Okay. Now, was there much of a cellar depression there? And maybe if you can remember, think about if there was any big maple trees around the yard, around the depression.
The depression, I imagine, would be about 2 or 3 feet deep in the deepest part. And then there was some large trees there.
Did they look like they were deliberately planted for yard trees?
I think they're planted for shade trees because the way they were planted around there.
Do you remember a couple of big lilacs being along the lane there?
Yeah, they're lilacs.
Okay, now that wouldn't be in the same spot, though, that the house sat, would it?
No, they're out of ways. They're out of, imagine where they trail in or something.
Yeah. Okay, there's.
Everybody had lilacs around here.
That's right.
Scotch, I guess.
Well, you know, it's interesting. When I was driving up the lane today to Hickory Hill Farm, you can see where either Scotch people or the Muirs in particular like to position their farmhouse on top of a hill with a wide view and a long ways off the road.
Yeah.
So, and in fact, the way the arrangement of the yard trees, the shade trees are at Hickory Hill, it's very similar to that farmyard there at Fountain Lake.
Yeah.
So then, Harry, because you are really the old-timer of Buffalo Township now. We just learned, you and I were talking about it before, that Ben Hull passed away. He was another guy in his 90s just recently. And, so I respect that you, and being that you were assessor and all at one time, you really know this stuff. So you're convinced then that the Archie Schmitz, the little house he built there for he and his wife, is sitting on the Muir house site?
I'm pretty sure it is.
Okay, well that helps me a lot, Harry, and otherwise you look like you're feeling pretty well, aren't you?
Yeah. Yeah, before Archie built there, Mrs. Marsh was here, and I remember going in there with her, and we were checking where that stood and all that.
I see, okay. Okay, good. I was going to ask you something. It slipped my mind there. The phone is ringing. I'll cut it off here. Okay, Harry just mentioned that Archie Schmitz built there on the Muir farmhouse site. For what reason was that, Harry?
Yeah, he figured he'd get a big price out of as long as he had a house on it.
I see, yeah, I've heard that too. But
you built it out on the road, you went back in there.
So you think, though, that pretty much the local belief up here is, and was at the time then, that Archie built on the old Muir house cellar depression?
I think it's about the same spot. I figured it was.
Okay, well, it's looking more and more like that's true. You were talking about Lenny Marsh Wolf. You spent some time there with her then. Was the Schmitz house, the little house there when Lenny Marsh Wolf visited?
No, it wasn't built at that time.
So it was just the depression left there.
Yeah. And those few rock where I suppose the timbers set on.
Okay.
Instead of building a basement, they'd dig a hole under the house.
Okay, that helps. Now, I've got a couple of photographs from the State Historical Society in the car, so I'm going to shut this off and run out and get them and see if that doesn't help you identify it. Okay, we're back. I've got two photos here. They're dated 1920, Harry. This is supposed to be the doorstep, or the doorstone, to the house that was at Fountain Lake. Did you ever see that? You remember ever seeing that stone?
Well, it was there. But, it was just a rock. It wasn't...
Just a rock. That's all it is. There's really nothing significant about it otherwise.
Water, it was just a rock.
Right. Okay, this is supposed to be a guy by the name of David Owens, and he's supposed to be pointing a stick into the old Muir cellar depression. Does that look like the site to you before the Schmitz house went in?
Yeah, that's about what it'd be. This is the lake out in there, I believe, isn't it?
That's the sand blow. This is the lake right
there,
down here.
Yeah, there's the lake. There's the house here, yeah.
Yeah. It's growing up a lot more now.
Oh, yeah.
But does that look pretty much where to you like it looked like, or?
It might be right about in here somewhere. So
Mm-hmm.
Go right down to the lake.
Was the that big spring meadow right below the house?
I never got down that far. I never got down, but...
Could you see the lake though from
oh,
where
yeah.
the house sat?
Yeah, where the house was, you had a good view of the lake.
Uh-huh. I see.
It must have been here somewhere, I imagine it'd be.
Okay. Do you remember if there was a wet meadow? Was there a slope going down to a wet meadow?
Yeah, there was a meadow in there.
And so was there a big spring down there, do you remember?
I imagine the spring there. I think it fed the lake. They said that's how it got
right.
the name of Fountain Lake.
That's right, okay. Now, if you were standing in this depression, then do you remember which direction the lilacs would have been when they had been to your right?
For sure.
They should have been right near a gully there, is that right?
Yeah, I imagine they would be off to the side there.
Okay. Do you remember when you came down the lane into the farm, right when you made that bend, you know, where and looked beyond where the farmyard was, there was a couple lilacs there?
Yeah.
Okay. But the house, you kept going to get to the house site, right?
No,
You just, okay. And then not too much further after the lilacs?
Not too far.
Okay.
There.
Okay. As long as I've got you on tape again, Harry, I was just going to say I want to thank you on tape for you and Maurice for signing the permission letter to put the Hickory Hill Farm on the National Register of Historic Places. We'll certainly give it our all to do that. The other thing I had a question of is on the old house that sat right where the granite marker is in the Muir Park now. I believe it belonged to the Ottos at one time, and then afterwards the McGraths. And it had a couple of wings coming off of it. Do you remember that house?
I don't remember too much about it.
Okay. No. It was kind of an old, unpainted house with an upright and two wings, as I understand.
Going by there and seeing it, but I never was in around it.
Okay, that, as far as you know, though, had nothing to do with the Muirs.
No.
Okay, and who would have built that house? Did you ever hear?
I wouldn't know who did.
Okay, but do you know who lived there when you were the assessor?
No, I can't. It was gone for a long time.
Okay, that's right. One of the wings from that house survived, and still survives today, I should say, and it's been moved to the Bessie Eggleston farm, and it's been used as a granary there. Yeah. So that's the deal on that one.
I just remember it being there. Of course, when we were kids, we didn't travel around much.
Well, that's right. I'm sure. Horse and buggies, and you still have neighbors around here doing that, I see, by the name of the Amish there.
Dad used to write for an insurance company, and that way I used to when I was small, but them things didn't mean to anything.
That's right. No, you have a tremendous memory, as I told you last time we were on tape. So then as far as the Muir site goes, then you think Archie Schmitz, when he built that little house back there, knew that it was the Muir site and actually was trying to...
Yeah, that's what he did.
Yeah, and he thought it'd be worth a lot sometime.
They figured he was going to get big money out of it.
I see. Okay. Well, that clears it up. So then you think if I were trying to prove where exactly the farmhouse sat, you'd believe then that it was on where the Schmitz house is rather than between the lilacs there on the site?
Yeah, I'd say that's what it was.
Okay, is where the Schmitz house is now. Okay. Did you ever hear where the other buildings were at Fountain Lake, like the barn and the stable and stuff like that?
I know where they were. Of course, they're built out of logs, and they're rotted down and disappeared too.
Okay. Well, Harry, thank you. We'll end it there today, and I'll see you again soon, and have a good birthday next month. And
I hope so.
Okay. Thank you. one thing I've learned in this whole study is it's much, much more difficult to trace the origins, the siting origins of buildings in sand country than it is in more nutrient-rich organic soils. However, farmsteads never leave the earth without leaving a trace. So if you're a good investigative architectural archaeologist and detective type, you can uncover those things. Not without an awful lot of help from elders, I may add. Like the architectural origins I just mentioned, there's nothing obvious about the sand. The nature of the sand is to leave very little obvious. It takes more than the eyes just to understand and unfold its beauty. Evidently, the whole shallow depression between the lilacs, popular rumor as to where the Fountain Lake farmhouse sat, originated with Bessie Eggleston and Millie Stanley in that group, because I haven't heard that from anyone else. There's some early accounts of the Muir's shanty, or the original log house, which would have to be the log shanty, the burrow shanty, sitting up there near the lilacs, at the lilac clump site. But Linnie Marsh Wolf mentions in her book, Pulitzer Prize-winning Son of the Wilderness, biography of Muir, that the substantial frame farmhouse was situated near and approximately just to the east of the burrowed shanty. The shanty site, if it were indeed between where the lilacs now bloom, would fit with that. Muir also described the shanty as being nestled into the slope, and he also described the more substantial, again, Fountain Lake permanent farmhouse as being on the hill, underlining on about 35 times. It makes me think that the shanty, the way it was in a lean-to garret kind of structure style, was nestled, in fact, into the hill, not being on top of it, but being built into it, and that the farmhouse sat again on top of the hill with a wide view and a more level, more expansive yard site. Getting back to the Fountain Lake Farm yard shade trees, they appear to be just as big in pictures that I saw from Irv Schmitz today as they are presently. There's no significant difference. They're very large trees. There's one absent on the northeast corner of the house, an unusually large maple. I believe these are silver maples. I'll have to look closer when they're leafed out. I don't think they're reds. They look like silvers by the bark. But at any rate, they're much, much older than anything the Schmitzes could have planted, and they have to go back to the period of the Muirs. I firmly believe that they were planted by the Muirs, and that their size would attest to that. It'd be interesting to try to get some ring counts off of the large stump that's just northeast of the house. At the Kearns homestead there, not the homestead, but the Kearns farm, the old Hickory Hill Muir farm, they've got a wonderful old Amish rocker that has walnut seat and back on it, that was built by somebody over by Kingston, an Amish fellow over there, probably off County B somewhere. I can ask. Kearns has some relatives over near there that work in Kingston, and they know who it is. A fellow, John Kearns, I believe, would know. To close for the day on all this stuff, I'm pretty heavy-hearted over Ben Hull, and that country up there, the Muir country, lost a heck of a guy. The country is a lot less for not having been. In other words, in this crazy modern world, there's no replacements coming up for people like that.